So we're excited today to welcome Lucy Lennox to the podcast. Hi, Lucy.
Hi.
We wanted to get you on the show to tell us about this anthology that's coming out this week for Valentine's Day. It's called Heart to Heart. Give us a little bit of the backstory here, and most importantly, maybe tell us the charities that it's going to benefit as well.
Okay, well, first of all, we're really excited about it. This is a darling of Leslie Copeland's, who is my beta reader. I call her my beloved beta reader. And this was her idea. And I can't remember now when she came up with the concept of it. It just sort of started out as one of these ideas that she ran with. And she told a couple of us authors that she works with and that she's friends with. And we're like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And it was always going to benefit charities, and she was going to try and pull together a handful, maybe 5 or 6 authors to write a short story to put together. And then word just got out, and it ended up there's 11 of us. And basically, the setup is this is, again, Leslie came up with this. The setup is that there is an app, a matchmaking app that's launching, and it promises, it's going to set you up with your one true love, but something goes wrong at the last minute. And the matchmaking app the algorithms are off, and it ends up matching up all these bizarre, never meant to be together couples. And each short story is a different couple. And the way that this sort of came about with the setup, and I'll talk about the charities too, because that's the whole reason we're doing this, so I can't wait to talk about that. But the setup, it was super fun. So Leslie went out onto Facebook and put sort of a Mad Libs type form out there, asking people to fill in different names and different occupations and different personality traits and everything. And then the authors who were participating got to choose from this crazy list of like bizarre. So you've got the mortician and the magician, and my story is the Uber driver and the phone sex operator. And so there's just sort of these madcap combinations, like the baker and the assassin, or I can't remember if I have that right, but they're super fun. Like you can tell just from seeing the setup that the stories are going to be super fun. So it got all of us authors really inspired to have fun with it. And so the authors got together and created a group where we talked about, okay, do we want to have all the money go to one charity or 3 charities or 5 charities? And we voted. And basically, we're still waiting for final approval to sort of officially announce who it's benefiting, but we're hoping to get approval for the fundraiser to benefit the Trevor Project, which was a unanimous choice by all of us, which we love. The Trevor Project, which, as you guys I'm sure know, is all about saving children's lives, LGBTQ youth lives, and a lot of suicide prevention, which just gives me goosebumps because it's so important, it's so timely, and especially with transgender statistics about suicide and everything else. I personally am a huge fan of the Trevor Project, and so I'm thrilled that was my number one choice. I'm thrilled they're on the list. And then we also have the Bisexual Resource Center as one of the beneficiaries. Hopefully, again, this is unofficial right now. We're still waiting for approval, and then from the charities themselves. And then the third is the 1 in 10 shelter, which is in Arizona, I believe, and they're the ones that experienced the fire, I believe. And so they're sort of rebuilding and recovering from that. So those are the 3 charities that will be the beneficiaries of all of the proceeds. And so there aren't even any expenses on this project because everything's been donated. Angsty G donated all of the cover artwork, and she's done a tremendous amount of work creating teasers, the cover art for the paperback full wrap and the ebook. And then editing services and proofreading services have been donated by Ann Atwood and Lori Parks. I know Courtney Bassett has done some beta reading and proofreading. Obviously, Leslie herself has done a lot of beta reading and proofing. And everyone's just come together to help each other out. Amy Wasp, A.E. Wasp, is one of the authors, and she is doing some really fun teasers on Facebook too that she's just creating with, like mine is a car dashboard and then it has a guy with a phone on it and a teaser, snippet. So they're super fun. So definitely check them out on Facebook. And the book comes out on Wednesday. It is going out to ARC readers today. So you guys will be lucky. You'll get your own copy. And it's 11 stories of just super fun setups. And also, we wrote a little intro story about how this software got messed up in the first place. So that has its own little romantic snippet, sort of, that's kind of fun. And I wrote that, and I wrote there's the first part of it is before the anthology starts, and then kind of the second part of their story is at the end. So you have to kind of get through to read what happens to the programmer. And so, yeah, that's all we're waiting for. I'm waiting for, actually, Sloane Kennedy is one of the authors, and you guys know she and I collaborate on some things. So I sent the last part of that to her last night. Help, make this better. And we're waiting on that before we send out the ARCs today. So we're super excited. It's a great group of authors. Everybody, all the authors involved, use sort of their own special skills to bring to their stories. So like Haley Turner writes, she likes to blow things up. So I think her story has some stuff like that in it. Charlie Cochet has some really cute, super Charlie type stuff in hers. Lily Morton, May Archer, Ruthie Luna, the author list itself is tremendous. I can't wait. I haven't read them all yet. I can't wait to read it. So I'm super excited to share it.
Yeah, we want to share the author lists so that people know it. So besides you, there's May Archer, Charlie Cochet, Poppy Dennison, Allison Hendricks, Sloane Kennedy, Ruthie Luno, thank you. I don't know why I can't read that today. Lily Morton, Chris Owen, Haley Turner, and A.E. Wasp, which is tremendous. Yeah. I love how it has bookends that you've kind of written what happens with the software and then all the stories kind of in between. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I wrote the first part of it just as a setup, and that was Leslie's idea. And then I shared it with Sloane yesterday, and she was reading it while she was on the phone with me, and she was laughing, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I totally need to know what happens to these characters." I'm like, "Are you kidding? You're being the reader. The reader we always talk about, that on release day, they're like, when's the next book out? I need to know about this side character and this side character, and I need their whole story right now." I'm like, "That's what you just did to me." She's like, "You have to at least write the second half of it." I'm like, "You're asking me to write a whole second short story?" She's like, "Yeah." So I did last night. I wrote the whole second half of it, and it was her. So it was Sloane Kennedy's idea to go ahead and write what happens, and the follow-up of sort of the fallout of what happened to this programmer after all of this. He went to hell, basically. And so I did that, and then it was her idea to put it at the end. So, yeah.
That's really great. That's only the way that we publish today can allow you to put something in yesterday, because we're talking to you on Friday morning. Before, 5 days before this anthology comes out, and you're still writing story for it. It's amazing.
Well, I just think it sounds like a remarkable project. When I saw the cover for the first time just the other day, and frankly, the quality of all of the authors involved, I just about lost my mind. I'm like, "Jeff, look at this! It's amazing!"
Yeah.
So,
and I have to say, we used your anthology that you guys did with the hockey, because we didn't know some of the things about copyright. How do you do copyright on a collection of short stories when each individual author owns their own copyright, but you need to copyright the collection and things like that. And, you have to make, when you're doing an anthology like this, you have to make it work for its purpose, first of all, the fundraising purpose. Our goal is to raise as much money as possible for these incredible charities that are doing this important work. And so you want to sell a lot of copies so that you can, donate more money. But at the same time, it still needs to be consistent with all of the authors involved and what their goals are and what they like to do for their brand. And so, I think, for me, collaborating with Sloane Kennedy is been an interesting challenge, because she writes a very different style than I do. And so we butt up against this a lot when we write together. But when you're bringing in 11 different authors for this anthology who have very different styles and tones and author voices, some are paranormal and some like to blow things up and some like to be, silly. And so to be able to do all of those things under the same umbrella and the same setup was, to me, one of the magical pieces of this project. Because everybody still gets a chance to shine, but they all come together and work under this sort of setup umbrella. So yeah, it's really exciting. And I forgot to mention too, it is going to be in Kindle Unlimited. The anthology is only going to be out for a limited time. It's going to be out for 90 days, which should take us to May 7th. So you definitely want to get it quick. It will be in Kindle Unlimited and available for sale on Amazon. And like I said, all proceeds from Amazon go directly to these charities. There are no expenses or anything else that comes out of it. So we're really excited.
That is fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for talking to us about the anthology, and we hope it does amazing things for sales to get money to these charities.
Awesome.
So, Lucy, Jeff and I recently finished Felix and the Prince, loved it to pieces, and we wanted to talk to you a few minutes about sort of the origin of this particular series. You had an incredibly successful series that you wrapped up not too long ago. What made you jump into this particular setting and sort of family of characters?
That's a really good question. I actually, when the Marion, I don't say that the Maid Marian series is really over, because there are a lot of things that I still want to do with it. But obviously, we ran through the brothers that were available, our 6 brothers that were available. And so after that, I actually had lots of different ideas for a new series that were based on, one was based on a group of friends from college who started a technology company together, and the technology company hit it big, and where all of them ended up and their stories. And I couldn't quite get that where I wanted it. I started a couple of books in that series, and it wasn't feeling right. And then I thought I was going to write a bodyguard series, and I started that, and that wasn't quite working right. So I started thinking about, okay, if you try and get back into that mindset that you were in before you ever published your first book, of writing just for you, writing the book that you want to write, regardless of what the market wants, regardless of what judgment you might get, what would you really want to write? And I wanted to write another family. The problem is you get judged when you write a family full of gay men because it's unrealistic. I mean, it is unrealistic. And I put that in the beginning of the first book of the series. It's like, this is dedicated to all of you who are willing to put up with me for doing this, because I know it's unrealistic. But what if it wasn't? What if, the heteronormative world, it allows us to have these default huge families full of really interesting characters. And it's not fair that we don't also get those big families full of characters, in the LGBT community. So it was a wish of mine, to be able to explore that some more. And I loved that family aspect of the Maid Marian series, and I wanted to capture some of that magic again, but I wanted to do it in a little bit of a different way. So having said that, obviously I didn't do it in a complete vacuum of not having feedback from my first series, because so much of what people loved about Maid Marian series was the family, the large family, the silliness that comes from a large crazy family. But also a lot of people loved the old ladies, the silly old lady trio. And I never really intended for them to be such a big part of the series, and I never really intended them to be quite so raunchy. But, some characters just do what they want to do, regardless of what the author plans. So I didn't really want to have that same thing. I didn't want to try and recreate the Aunt Tilly trio in the new series. But I did want to explore some of the more serious reactions that came out of having that group, especially Granny and Irene, who were, a senior citizen couple, a gay couple, who were, I found it fascinating and I'm going to come back around to my point here in a minute, but I found it fascinating that thinking about when you look at the long lifespan of a gay couple by the time they get to the ages that we're talking about, and how many different periods in our culture's time they've lived through, I mean, obviously, you have the AIDS epidemic. You have, for Grandpa and Doc, who I've introduced in this new series, it goes back to they were born in the 40s. No, they were born in the 30s and 40s. And so there's so much history, so much of how they live their life in regards to their sexuality has had to change over all of these decades as our culture has changed, as our government has changed, as the country's perceptions have changed. And I realized that I wanted to explore that a little bit more. So not the humor side of having this older couple who's gay, but the emotional side of it, the challenges, the coming to terms with how society is shifting, even though the two of you have been in your relationship for a long time. So having said that, when I started this new series, this patriarch couple sort of appeared with Grandpa and Doc. And I realized that I have a huge family, but Grandpa and Doc are at the top of it. And so I'm really looking forward to writing their story as well. So they take a big role in each of the books in terms of being, and you guys and I talked before the interview started about Grandpa and Doc being sort of the mentor to this younger generation, not only showing them the courage to live out loud, the courage to be with who you want to be with, but also that steadfast, committed relationship that some of the Wilde kids don't have that. Like Felix specifically didn't have parents who were married and committed, but he ended up getting raised by Doc and Grandpa, who were that very sort of traditional. I mean, you know, Grandpa was a rancher and Doc was a doctor, and they live in a small town, and they lived on their ranch and in a farmhouse and with a big kitchen and family dinner and making chili and all of these things. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore. So having said that, though, I love tropes. I'm a super tropey reader. I love seeing, you could just see, the book I always use as an example is a book called On the Island, I think. And it's an MF contemporary romance. Was stranded on a deserted island, okay? And there's an age difference, which is not usually my thing, but in that one, and so I read it a few years ago, and I remember talking to my sister, who's also an author, about it at the time, and she said, yeah, give me any stranded on a deserted island, one click. I don't need to read the blurb. I don't need to know about the characters. You just tell me there's a couple stranded on a deserted island, and I want it.
Yeah. Will's all about forced proximity.
Yes. And enemies to lovers, like you name it. Like for me, stranded in a cabin in Alaska was a big one for me. An airplane crash would also be a big, which I've tried. I've started one of those. They're harder than they look to write. But The Martian also, which I posted about recently. I love The Martian, the book and the movie. And my sister and I were like, you could write 10 more Martians with different versions of Mark Watley's challenges, and we'd read it. So I'm really drawn to those. And so that's where Felix's book came from, the royal, because the MF contemporary romance can go to town on a royal, hidden royal stories. You know, oh, I've always wanted my prince, but we don't have a ton of that in gay romance at all yet. I mean, there are definitely some. So I decided sort of midway through last year, I definitely wanted to write a royal story, and I wrote it. And right before it came out, of course, the Prince Harry and Meghan Markle got engaged. So that was great timing for me because it got everybody excited about it again. And I know that Riley Hart and is it Riley and Christina together have a Prince? I hope I'm not getting that wrong. Have a Prince book coming out, and I know there are a couple of other people. So it's going to be really exciting because they're evergreen tropes. I mean, we're always going to love those stories, but right now it's particularly exciting, I think. So that's how I decided to write the royal romance. And then Facing West, the first book in the series, I knew from Maid Marian, of all of the side characters that came out of Maid Marian, the one I wanted to tell his story was Nico, Griff's best friend from Grounding Griffin. And I didn't know what his story was. But when I started thinking about why he ended up on the streets, which is how he met Griff, I had to figure out how he ended up on the streets. And that's where I sort of went into his story. So it's not really, I mean, I guess you could consider it a spin-off, the Forever Wild series of the Maid Marian series, but you don't have to have read Maid Marian at all. And I try and write each book so that you don't have to have read any of the previous books.
Yeah, and
so for sure, Felix, yeah.
So far for Felix, because he's got book one in progress. I haven't read book one, and I'm having no issue with Felix at all. That just took off and went. I'm so excited. You said you're going to write the story of Grandpa and Doc at some point, because I'm interested in where that is, and I don't think we see that a lot in gay romance, where you'd get the story of how these two men now who are senior citizens started. So I can't wait to see that.
Well, I'm really excited. I know what the story is in my head, and I'm really excited to write it, because I've had several readers email me speculating, or I've even had a reader emailing saying, this can't be right. They can't have these children like that. That just wouldn't. And I'm like, you don't know yet. Just give me some time to tell their story, and then you'll learn how this all came to be with this family. Of it, in fact, it might have been in the scene. I can't remember. It might have been in the scene you guys were talking about earlier, where Grandpa. I think it's Grandpa explains a little bit of how they're Doc's children. Doc had a wife, and but I can't wait to tell their story. But that story is going to take some work on my part. I think one of the challenges for me to write Grandpa and Doc's story is that my voice is very, I don't know what the right word is, colloquial or slang. I'm a big F-bomb dropper. I used a lot of just, current language in my voice, and that's not going to play if you're, writing a story that's taking place in the 60s or 50s or 70s and these different eras in Doc and Grandpa's past. So it's definitely going to be a labor of love for me to get that story out and make sure that it's right before I release it. But I'm really excited, and I get asked about it all the time.
I'm kind of curious about the setting for Felix and the Prince. The first book in the Wilde series is essentially it's a small town romance for the most part. But then Felix and the Prince is set on the other side of the world in this castle in the middle of nowhere, and then they're surrounded by stained glass. It's almost like a gothic fairy tale that they're like living right in the middle of. So I was wondering if what were your thoughts about setting two books in the same series, like in two, incredibly different places?
That's a really good question, because when I started the Forever Wild series, I really thought that it was going to be set in this small town for the most part. Some of the siblings live in Dallas, and so I knew that if I wanted a more urban, like for instance, if I wanted to write the CEO and his assistant type setup, that might need to be something that happened in a bigger city. So I had Dallas there for that. Hobie's close enough. But when you write a hidden royal story, you either have to have the royal come, which we've read plenty and seen movies where the royal comes and you don't recognize them and they're in this tiny town. And but when Felix sort of revealed himself to me as a character at the end of Facing West, he was this shy academic sitting in the corner of Doc and Grandpa's kitchen. And the character that I wanted to pit against a prince would be to create the conflict as a character who couldn't be in view of the paparazzi for some reason, because the prince is all paparazzi. And so in order to keep them apart, I needed a reason why. Otherwise, you fall in love with the prince and you live happily ever after. Yay! Nobody wants to read that book. So I needed it to be somebody who was like, I can't do that. I love you to death, but I can't live in view of the paparazzi. And so what would cause him to be that way? Number one, he's super shy. He's an academic. But then we find out that his mother is this sort of selfish megastar who abandoned him to pursue her Hollywood career, and sort of trots him out whenever she has a movie release because it makes her seem a little bit more approachable to the media maybe. And so that's when I realized that, wow, if he is in the process of running away actively running away from the paparazzi when he meets the prince, that sets up that conflict because he's hiding in in a real world version of one of his textbooks, and by going to that castle in pursuit of the stained glass knowledge, and so he can have this little temporary fairy tale while he's there. But then what happens? And obviously, there's so many issues involved in the idea of a gay king that, I could have written a whole nother book much more about that. But again, those are some of the decisions that you have to make along the way when you remind yourself, okay, I'm not writing a treatise about gay royalty. I'm writing a romance novel, and this story is about these two people. And, but yeah, I mean, the stained glass thing, I can't even remember I wanted him to be super geeky, something really archaic almost, that not only was his nose in a textbook, but they were dusty old textbooks, like not on a computer, but that he was like in a cubicle in the back of some ancient library studying something archaic. And for some reason, stained glass came up in my head, and that's when I thought, okay, that's the perfect combination to get him to a castle. And then the other thing, to answer your question, is when you think about writing a tropey romance, you've got to deliver on the promise of that trope. So you have a royal romance. Well, there's certain scenes you want to see in a royal romance. You want to see them having to learn etiquette. And I didn't quite get as much of that in there as I wanted. You want to see the coronation or the big ball, especially if in a gay romance. How are you going to have that big ball moment where they can't dance together in front of everybody? But that's another big scene, the promise, and the makeover scene. That's another, where the princess gets, the everyday girl gets fitted for the gown, and so to do that in this kind of story, there's certain scenes you want to see. And to me, a hidden room in a castle was one of those scenes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So good. We love Felix and the Prince so much. We highly recommend everyone check it out. So, of course, the next question I'm going to ask is, when is the next Wilde book coming out?
Good question. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Body and Soul. My next release with Sloane Kennedy comes out very soon. The official release date is Tuesday, but we may push the button a little early because we have the anthology coming out on Wednesday also. And then I have already started writing Otto's story. Otto is the firefighter. We meet him in Felix and the Prince. I think there's reference to him in Facing West, just sort of, oh yeah, my brother Otto and Saint are in the military. But Otto's story is a childhood best friend's story that was heavily inspired by Leslie Copeland, my beloved beta reader. She heard a song that was about childhood best friends turned soulmates, and she said, you've got to write a story like this. So basically, I'm writing it right now, and I'm hoping to release it in mid-March, but I have learned not to make promises because you never know how the book is going to come out. I wrote Delivering Dante last year. It came out in early May, and I wrote it and I wrote the whole book, wasn't happy with it, tried to fix it, revised it, spent a lot of time on it, still wasn't happy with it, sent it to Leslie to beta read, had my sister read it. Both of them were like, yeah, it's fine. I'm like, yeah, it's fine thing. And started from scratch and wrote the whole thing again. So you never know when that's going to happen. And at the pace that we go with self-publishing, I published 10 books in my first year of publishing. And that is just a crazy pace. And so I can give you, like a mid-March. I hope mid-March. If it goes well, if all goes well, mid-March.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, whenever it comes out.
So if Otto and Walker speak to me. So far, it's going well.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Well, Thank you, Lucy, for joining us on the show and filling us in on this fantastic new series.
Awesome. Thank you.